Right, so I'm going to be going over some of the answers to this cell exam review. So cell theory, basically what is a cell? There are four key aspects to that. One is that all living things are made of cells. Let's write all life is cells. Another is that cells are the smallest unit of life, meaning they're the smallest thing that can be considered to be alive. Any smaller than that, and you're into like molecules, and molecules are not considered to be alive. So cells are the smallest thing that display all of the properties of a living organism. Their structure is correlated to their function. And cells come from other cells. So you can't get cells just out of nothing. Cells have to come from other cells dividing to make them. Prokaryotic cell is the simple bacteria cell, whereas eukaryotic cells are the more complex cells that make up you and also all animals, all plants, all fungus, all protozoas, really anything that's not a bacteria. They do have some similarities, some things that are similar for all cells. They have a membrane, they have genetic material, so DNA. They have ribosomes, which they need to make their proteins. However, there are a lot of differences. Eukaryotic cells are bigger. They are what we call compartmentalized, which means that they have all of those organelles or cell pieces inside of them that prokaryotic cells do not have. So all of the things you studied, especially the nucleus, having the DNA inside of a nucleus is a big thing for eukaryotic cells and not prokaryotic cells, but also things like mitochondria, things like Golgi, all of those cell parts except for the stuff here is really a eukaryote exclusive. Okay, so moving on, let's do these true falses. Fungi cells are eukaryotic cells. That is true. Again, pretty much anything that is not bacteria is a eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotic cells are always multicellular organisms. That is false. There are single cell eukaryotes. Some examples include like amoebas or yeast. Those are single cell eukaryotes. Now, prokaryotic cells are never multicellular organisms, and multicellular organisms are always eukaryotic cells, but there are some single cell eukaryotes as well. All right, matching structures and functions for these guys. Let's see, the lysosome helps break down worn out cell parts or also like other invaders, like if, pathogens get in. The chloroplast is responsible for photosynthesis, so we don't find those in animal cells. The cell membrane is a selective semi-permeable, meaning some things can get through and some things cannot, that surrounds every cell, including the prokaryotes. The nucleus, we could consider the control center of the cell. It contains the DNA, and it's only in eukaryotes. Cytoplasm, semi-fluid substance composed of water and salts. It's pretty much just the goo that fills the cell, and all cells are going to have that. The ribosomes are responsible for making proteins, and the mitochondria generates energy as ATP. So the mitochondria does cellular respiration. So the process of diffusion is just the process of molecules, particularly molecules in water, like in liquid or in gases, naturally spreading out from high concentration to low concentration. So if you have a bunch of molecules that are crowded together, over time they're going to fly around, they're going to bounce off of each other, and they are going to spread out to become less crowded. And so this would be the high concentration, and then the end result would be the low concentration. They'll spread out as much as they can. True or false? So cells must use energy to diffuse things across their membrane. That is false. Diffusion happens all by itself without the use of any energy. It's just a natural process that occurs. Cells that are small are most efficient at diffusing things all the way in or out of the cell. That is true. That comes down to that surface area to volume ratio thing. The smaller the cell, the higher the surface area to volume ratio, the quicker it is for it to get stuff in and out of the cell. Most molecules can easily diffuse across the cell membrane. That is false. Some molecules can easily diffuse, but they have to be very small, they have to not have a charge, they have to be nonpolar. So things like oxygen and carbon dioxide are good examples of things that can easily diffuse, but larger molecules like proteins or sugars, things that are ions like salts, those things cannot easily diffuse across the cell membrane. Cells naturally contain some dissolved substances like salts, that's true. The cytoplasm will have some dissolved salt in it. Water tends to move towards where there is a higher concentration of dissolved substances. Definitely, that's an important thing to remember. Water moves towards salt, or sometimes sugar, whatever it is that's dissolved. The process of oxygen diffusing across the cell membrane is called osmosis. That's false. Osmosis is the process of water diffusing across the cell membrane, so it has to be water. And all cells in any given organism are basically the same. That is false. You have a lot of different kinds of cells. They're differentiated. Your liver cells are not the same as your bone cells, are not the same as your blood cells. They have different shapes, they have different contents, they have different functions. And these questions are some applications of osmosis. Why does putting salt on a slug kill the slug? So salt, if you just pour salt on a slug, it's going to be highly concentrated. And since a slug has sort of a gooey mucous membrane on the outside of it, we have this sort of protective layer of dead skin in front of our living skin, and this, if we put salt on our skin, it's probably not going to hurt because it's just touching the dead skin and it's not getting to the gooey watery part. But the slug doesn't have that. So what's going to happen if you put salt on the slug is that high concentration of salt is going to pull the water out of the cells of the slug, and it's going to make it shrivel up and die. And that will be through the process of osmosis. Now here, if a person drank way too much water and didn't excrete it through urination, what would happen to their cells? So it's true, you can actually die from drinking too much water. This has happened before. There was a woman who entered a radio contest to try to win a Nintendo Wii. It was called Hold Your Pee for a Wii. And she had to drink a whole bunch of water and not pee, and she actually died because she made her blood so watery that water rushed into her cells, like her brain cells, and it caused them to swell up and eventually pop because so much water went in there because her blood was so watery and there was a higher concentration of molecules that were dissolved inside of her cells. So I don't want you to worry oh no, I'm going to drink too much water and die. You have to drink a lot of water and also intentionally, not go to the bathroom for this to happen to you. But there have been cases where something like this happened. Surface area to volume ratio, my favorite concept. There's so many examples of this in the body, but some we talked about include in your digestive system, in your intestines, how they're squiggly and folded in order to have maximum surface area for absorption of nutrients. Your brain is squiggly and folded to have maximum surface area for thinking on. Your lungs are all branched. So again, lots of surface area for oxygen to diffuse across. There's also other real-life examples, like from cooking, for example. If you want to cool something down that you've cooked, like a big pot of soup, it'll cool a lot faster if you put it into like a wide flat pan like this as opposed to leaving it in a pan like this. Why? Lots more surface area for the heat to diffuse out of. And of course, the waffle fries, fry like this versus fry like this with all these holes in it. This one's going to taste better because it has a lot more surface area to get crispy. So we talked about how life is sort of organized in levels. There's smaller levels and they kind of work together to make the bigger levels and the bigger levels until you get to an entire organism. So the smallest level on this list is the organelle, which is just one of the cell parts. Then the cell. Then we have the tissue, which is made of cells. Then we have the organs, which are made of those tissues, organ systems, which are made of those organs and tissues, and then finally the entire organism, which is like the whole animal or plant or whatever it is. Then we talked about how different organ systems work together in order to keep the organism alive, and we briefly discussed the functions of 3 of them. So the digestive system, digesting food, respiratory system, bringing in oxygen and putting out carbon dioxide, and then the circulatory system, which circulates your blood through your body and brings the nutrients from the digestive system and the oxygen from the respiratory system to all the cells in the body. So the respiratory system needs the digestive system because the cells in the respiratory system need that energy and nutrients that are produced by the digestive system. The respiratory system also needs the circulatory system because it needs those nutrients to be brought to it, and it also is responsible for gas exchange, so it needs the oxygen to be taken away from it and the carbon dioxide to be brought to it so it can release it to the outside. The digestive system relies on the respiratory system because oxygen is necessary for the breakdown of food into energy, into ATP. And so the respiratory system brings that, and then carbon dioxide is produced as a byproduct of cellular respiration, so the digestive system needs to get rid of that as well. The circulatory system also relies on the respiratory system because, again, those cells of the circulatory system need that oxygen as well, and they need to get rid of their carbon dioxide as well. The digestive system relies on the circulatory system to bring it the oxygen from the respiratory system, to get rid of its carbon dioxide, and also to take the nutrients that it's producing around the body. The respiratory system requires the circulatory system as well because the oxygen needs to be taken through the respiratory system, and the carbon dioxide needs to be brought back to the respiratory system, and the circulatory system is what does that. So homeostasis is really just the state of everything in the organism being at the correct level and the correct balance to keep that organism functioning. And that includes temperature, hydration, different hormone levels, salt levels, like blood sugar and food energy levels. Just all the levels of all the different things that need to be correct in order to keep the organism alive. Maintaining that is homeostasis. So if we use the analogy of an AC system, we have the thermostat, which is the sensing part that senses the temperature. That gets relayed to the AC unit. So for example, if it senses the temperature is too hot, the AC unit, then the thermostat will signal for it to turn on. It will get cooler, and then the thermostat will again sense the temperature, realize it's okay now, the AC unit will turn off, and then that loop is kind of closed. Okay, you take your temperature during the day and you notice that sometimes it's a little bit higher and a little bit lower. Um, you should not be concerned because while there is sort of a level for homeostasis, throughout the day your body's constantly like adjusting and readjusting, so there might be times that your temperature is a little high and there might be times that your temperature is a little low, but as long as it's sort of revolving around this midpoint, it's okay. It only gets to be a problem if your temperature gets like way too high or way too low. But a little bit of variation around where it ought to be is fine. So here are some graphs, which is positive feedback and which is negative feedback. So this graph should be representing positive feedback. This graph should be representing negative feedback. Why? Positive feedback is that snowball rolling down the hill and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We get a bigger and bigger and bigger response over time. Negative feedback is something's off, it gets corrected, something's off again, it gets corrected, something's off again, it gets corrected. So negative feedback is this sort of staying around a set point, revolving around that a little bit, but staying close to this set point. Whereas positive feedback is where it's pushing it away from the set point into a bigger and bigger response. So some examples of positive feedback would include childbirth, where you get a bigger and bigger and bigger response, harder and harder contractions, more and more hormones until finally the baby is born. Negative feedback loops can include a lot of things. They're much more common in the body, but the temperature example, it gets hot, your body senses that, tells you to start sweating, cools off, body senses that, tells you to stop sweating. We also have examples like blood sugar, for example. When you eat something, you get a lot of sugar released into your blood. Then your body senses that your blood sugar is getting too high. The control center, central nervous system, gives a signal to your pancreas to release a hormone called insulin. Insulin causes the sugar to go out of your blood and into your cells. Once the blood sugar gets back down lower to normal, then again that is sensed. Your central nervous system sends a message to your pancreas to stop putting out that insulin, and then we're back to normal. So it's something is off, gets corrected, sense that the correction is happening, the response stops, back to homeostasis. All right, that's going to be the end of that review. Please send me a message if you have any questions.